Alex Wood has a 5.05 ERA, which is 10th worst among pitchers with at least 60 innings this year. So what is going on with Wood? What is going on with the bullpen? We'll get to those questions and many others on today's mailbag edition of the show.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, as I said, it is a mailbag edition of the show. So let's just jump right into the questions. The first question comes from Mike Yastrzemski Enjoyer, who says, any insight into why Alex Wood has been struggling so much this season compared to last? Also, do the peripherals suggest that Wood should have better results than he has, and that his performance will eventually level out, or are those numbers not very good either? So a lot of questions today kind of about Wood and about the starting rotation, some DeSclafani mixed in, Junis and Long mixed in. So we're going to tie all this into this answer. But the simple fact is, like, when I look at Alex Wood's numbers this year, there's not too much from a peripheral standpoint that is different than 2021. And I mean, honestly, yes. So basically, no. So the 5.05 ERA, like I said, is 10th worst in baseball. But the fielding independent pitching, the FIP, is 3.62. Last year it was 3.48. So that's pretty stable. The xFIP is 3.45 this year. It was 3.44 last year. The xERA for Alex Wood, expected ERA, 4.04 this year, which is somewhat high. And last year it was all the way up at 3.89, which is somewhat high as well. And he did have a 3.83 ERA. So last year the actual ERA ended up aligning pretty closely with the expected ERA. This year his actual ERA is a run worse than his expected ERA. And so do I see a guy who really has deserved a 5.05 ERA? Absolutely not. When I look, okay, so what explains the difference between the peripheral numbers and the actual numbers? Well, look no further than a 337 average on balls in play, which is much higher than last year's 305 mark, and his career mark is 304. So typically with BABIP, average on balls in play, we kind of expect guys to get to their career numbers if they've been established and in the league for a long time. It's not, unless you're like going through a decline, which, I mean, he's 31 years old. You wouldn't expect massive decline suddenly at age 31 necessarily unless there's an injury. But yeah, I mean, his average on balls in play is 32 points higher than it was last year. And then the strand rate. This is something I'm always talking about, and it is just as much as average on balls in play, kind of a luck/sustainability indicator. Doesn't always mean you've been, quote, unlucky, but it does point to correction in a either positive or negative way. And for Wood, he's underperforming what you would expect in terms of basically stranding runners when he lets them on base. So normally, and for pretty much everybody, they're going to get to around 72% if they're a major league quality player, which of course Alex Wood is. He's pitched over 1,000 innings in the majors. He's got a 3.60 career ERA. He's an established major leaguer, and his career left on base percentage is 73.8%. So actually even a little better than you might expect. And sometimes good defense can account for this. And certainly he played on some good defensive teams when he was with the Dodgers, the Giants last year. And so whatever, it's career number is 73.8. But this year he's only stranding 66.5% of the runners that he allows on base. And so I would expect that number to trend more to 72%. I would expect the average on balls in play to trend more to his career mark of 304. And as a result, you're going to see that ERA come down, barring something unforeseen. Like I would put strong money on the ERA coming down, right? It's not too much of a shock when you're talking about a guy who has a 5.05 with a career ERA of 3.60. So I looked at some other stuff. I looked at fastball velocity, pitch mix, and nothing really stands out. Like his fastball is actually being thrown a little bit harder this year than it was thrown last year, and the mix is pretty much the same. So when I look at Alex Wood, it's kind of like I'm not very satisfied with the explanation I just gave, but really he's just, when I look at these numbers, he's a guy I expect to trend in a better direction. And I just must point out, they're not paying him to be like a frontline starter. So he's got a 2-year, $25 million contract. So once this year is over, he enters next year in another contract year. And so the motivation is there to have a strong year. It's not like he can just sit back and relax. He's got a comfortable 6-year deal or something. No, this is a short-term deal. $12.5 million per year is very modest money for a free agent signing. This is kind of back-end starter money, and I think there's upside beyond that. So it's not like some disastrous contract situation, and I see him getting better as the season goes along. And the defense plays a part in this. Like if they're just not converting the balls in play into outs at a high enough rate, we've seen this not just with Alex Wood, but with Alex Cobb and Tyler Rogers and many other Giants, some of whom we'll talk about a little bit later. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to talk about the bullpen and the stark contrast between the bullpen in the first month of the season and the bullpen in the last few months of the season. So stay tuned for that. But first, whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing? That's absolutely me. Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. So this is a game changer. Having trouble choosing, also not wanting to deal with the high pressure kind of environment of having to go into a jewelry store in person. I think it's much better to be able to do this online, especially when you can consult with jewelry experts 24/7 at your convenience. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Giants listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever peace. Go to BlueNile.com today. Alrighty, as promised, more questions and answers in this mailbag edition of the show. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. So Herbal T says, what's up with the stark contrast between the bullpen now and the first month and a half of the season? And the captain says, what do you think needs to be done with the bullpen? Trade, call up, wait it out, and they will fix themselves? So yeah, the bullpen has certainly been a little bit of an issue overall on the season. I mean, for me, I always just kind of look at the big picture. I don't really think it's that relevant to break down performance into months. For example, we're always doing this. Like in June, they did this. In April, they did this. I'm not saying that's what the questions are doing here. I'm saying if my answer was like, well, how come in June they've been this much better? It doesn't make any sense. It's more like combine it all, and you got a better picture than if you just break it into months. Like these month cutoffs are just random kind of 30-day samples. You can cut off from the middle of one month to the middle of the next month, and that's the same slice of time. So it's kind of a weird thing that we do. But on the season, the Giants do have a 4.11 earned run average out of their bullpen. And just for fun, I'm going to look at what has it been in the month of June. And in the month of June, actually, that's funny, the ERA for the Giants relievers is 3.46. So that is not what I expected, but just another example of how it's best to kind of look at these things instead of just making assumptions. Kind of like the offense. I'm getting always questions about the struggling offense and the incompetent offense. But if you look at the numbers, like they're above average, by weighted runs created plus. They score among the top number of runs per game in the game. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just worth looking at the numbers. So anyway, but I'm not going to answer it that way. I'm going to answer this more like, what is up with the bullpen overall on the season, having a 4.11 ERA, which is 13th worst. So I guess, 17th best in Major League Baseball this season, actually 18th best at 4.11. Whereas you look at a competitor like the Padres and the Dodgers, they're at 3.37 and 3.40 respectively. So over half a run per 9 innings better than the Giants. And the Giants had the best ERA in the major leagues last year. So this has emerged for me as one of the bigger deals when you're looking at how do you improve the 2022 Giants and what is holding the 2022 Giants back from being the team they want to be. The bullpen not being kind of a shutdown bullpen is a big reason for that. And so I must point out, when I look at the numbers, the fielding independent pitching, just by way of example, is better. It's at 3.89. But if you look at the expected fielding independent pitching, it actually exactly matches the ERA at 4.11. But what expected fielding independent pitching is doing is it's giving you a league average home run rate, essentially. And the Giants are not pitching at a league average home run rate. And so that's saying, like, if they had a league average home run rate, this is the ERA that we would expect, 4.11, but they don't have that. And so I look more at the fielding independent pitching saying 3.89. That's what we should have expected based on these peripheral numbers. And so once again, their strand rate as a team in the bullpen is only 69.7%. So they're underperforming by a couple of percentage points in terms of not stranding the runners that they allow on base. And that definitely can have something to do with the defense. I should also point out that their ground ball rate is among the best in the game at 46.2%. But if you're not converting those into outs, then what does it even matter? Normally, getting a lot of ground balls is a good thing, and it means you're going to prevent home runs, which they do. They are among the leader. They're actually not that. They're 19th in preventing home runs at 0.96 home runs per 9 innings. But if we look at the individual performers in the pen, John Brebbia, this is just a perfect example of, a lot of I was like supporting John Brebbia through it all. Ever since the Giants picked him up, I was optimistic about John Brebbia. And then last year, I was still saying that I believe in this guy, even though he was not doing well. But now he's been arguably their best reliever. He's got a 2.83 ERA, hasn't allowed a home run. Peripherals are good. And so that's great. It's just an example of the volatility of relievers is what I'm trying to say. Camilo Doval has had his ups and downs, but has generally been pretty good. Got a 3.19. Tyler Rogers' struggles have been a big reason for the overall struggles of the bullpen because he was supposed to be a reliable late inning guy, and he just hasn't been. He's got a 4.96. But hey, the expected ERA is 2.88. I kind of lump him and Alex Cobb together, and just in terms of guys who the expected ERA just being so much worse, not just like somewhat worse, but dramatically worse than the actual ERA. And I really do chalk it up. If you've watched every single time these guys have pitched, it really is like weakly hit balls that have just not been converted into outs. And if you do that a little bit more, or a lot more in their case, then the numbers would look much better. But the Giants haven't been able to do that. But overall, they haven't been able to get enough guys to just have consistently really good numbers. And so I do think that when the trade deadline rolls around, and we're only about a month away, that this is definitely an area where they could look to make a move. Like Zach Littell's got a 4.97, José Álvarez 5.28. Mauricio Llovera in his brief time in the majors just hasn't been consistently good enough. Jake McGee has an ERA up around 7 with an expected ERA of around 8. So that's a big deal. Harleen Garcia has been solid, but just not enough reliable bullpen arms right now. And if this trend continues for about a month, I do think, like in terms of the question, what can they do about it? There are a few things they can do about it. And one of the best things is that they're not really locked into any of these guys. They don't have any long-term commitments. Think Mark Melancon and how he wasn't performing well, and they were certainly locked in on Mark Melancon. But Camilo Doval, I mean, there's flexibility up and down here, including the ability to option about half of their pen in Sam Long, Zach Littell, John Brebbia, Tyler Rogers, and Camilo Doval. All of those guys have minor league options. The only guys who can't be optioned are Dominic Leone, Jake McGee, and Harleen Garcia. But McGee is the only one of those three that you possibly would want to take off the roster at some point because of the performance suffering. So there's a question later on about the Giants kind of cutting players who they owe money. And I do think, I'm not saying I'm there with McGee. He was so good after coming off the IL. I definitely want to see more from McGee, but they're only paying him $2.5 million this year. And there's a buyout of $500,000. So not half, but close to half of that $2.5 million has already been paid. So really it's just a $1.25 million commitment for the rest of the year, plus the $500,000 buyout. So close to $2 million. So it's not nothing, but it's also not a lot. And so they do have the flexibility to kind of do whatever they want. If the performance just isn't there, I don't think they would hesitate to move on if they really believed it wasn't going to improve. And so there's going to be a lot of guys available via trade at the deadline. I think relievers, especially like the non-elite relievers, but good ones, you can always find these guys. And it doesn't you don't necessarily have to give up that much. And so I would definitely put the Giants in the market there. And they've also got some pieces in the minor leagues that they can continue to check out as they go throughout the season. I mean, there's Sean Jelly, who we've seen at times, Gregory Santos, Kervin Castro, Llovera, Junior Marte. Just saw a note from Eno Saris on Twitter that Junior Marte's stuff, this is a metric now, stuff plus is, I think, like the best in the minor leagues among relievers, according to his metric. So I was impressed at times from Junior Marte, but then he kind of faltered after a hot start. But maybe you give him another look. So they have some guys they can try out again, and then if it all doesn't work out, they can always go the trade route, and they're kind of flexible in their pen. So coming up next, we're going to talk about the concept of cutting players who are guaranteed money and years even in some cases. Like, for example, is it within the realm of possibility that Evan Longoria could be designated for assignment at some point this season if the performance doesn't pick up significantly? So we'll get to that question momentarily. But first, betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. We've got updated playoff odds. I bet you can find some people who are down on the Giants right now, and maybe you take a favorable bet on the Giants to make the postseason. I saw those odds. I can't remember exactly what they were, but check it out for yourself. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Bet online, where the game starts. As the sun comes out and small businesses are back in business, LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier to grow your team. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the people you want to interview faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. And did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonmlb. That's linkedin.com/lockedonmlb to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, as promised, we're going to broach the subject of these veteran players, some of whom on multi-year contracts. Like, the fans have been kind of clamoring for this in a way for a while this season, because we have seen some roster crunches like Luis González and that whole deal and how he got sent down. And that was only 4 days. We did say that these things usually resolve themselves, and they did. And it's happened again. Like Wade is about to come back, and then Gonzalez gets hurt and goes on the injured list. But when you have a roster crunch like that, a lot of people want to know, why don't you just cut these players who are performing worse? Like, for example, people at the time, I think, wanted to get rid of La Stella before he had even played on the season yet, which was kind of weird. But there's La Stella, there's Darren Ruff, and there's Evan Longoria. These are the three players who kind of get this attention. And so the question comes from Mays to Posey, who says, do you think the nature of the guaranteed contract meaningfully precludes the front office from being objectively willing to release/buy out those players by end of season? Longoria, La Stella, McGee. Oh, McGee's another one. I.e., how much more leeway will those guys get than their performance deserves? And then K.M. McConnell says, is there any history with Farhan releasing underperforming veterans from rosters? There have been fans who have called for DFAs of players like Longoria and La Stella and bullpen guys, but is it even a possibility? So I just do want to address this subject, and as I'm reading it, I meant to look. It's on the tip of my tongue. I feel like there was a precedent for releasing an underperforming. Was it Howie Kendrick? No, Crawford, not J.P. Crawford, but the Carl Crawford, right, with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Wasn't he released when he was with the Dodgers and Zaidi was the GM? I believe so. So that was a big one. I mean, he was owed a lot of money, but the performance just wasn't there, and they cut him. So I think he was injured at the time, so it's kind of a different story. But yeah, I think there is precedent. They've also, when Zaidi was the Dodgers GM, they made some unpopular moves just for the sake of what they thought was improving their team. Like, I'm forgetting his name too. A.J. Ellis, was that his name? The catcher, who was like Clayton Kershaw's personal catcher. And they traded him, and it was like a gut punch to the Dodgers clubhouse. And they did it to acquire another catcher, Carlos Ruiz, from the Phillies. And anyway, it's a different kind of thing, but it's also a similar thing in a way. I mean, it doesn't really get to what you're saying, but what I'm saying is that they're willing to make an unpopular move, even if it's unpopular in the clubhouse, just for the sake of getting better. And so in terms of Longoria, La Stella, McGee, and all those guys, I do think it remains in play if they just truly believe the performance is not going to pick up. But for a guy like La Stella, I wanted them to sign La Stella in the first place. I think that we haven't seen the best of Tommy La Stella still. In the last few days, I thought that his at-bat quality has picked up quite a bit. He is striking out more and chasing more than you would expect from him, given his kind of career numbers. He did change his swing. It could be that the more aggressive swing, looking for more power, leads to some more chase and swing and miss and strikeouts. It's not like he's striking out a ton, but just for him, he's striking out more than you would expect. But I believe in Tommy La Stella, so I'm not ready to just cut Tommy La Stella. He's signed for one more year after 2022. For me, the question is someone like McGee or someone like Longoria specifically. And yes, they had Zaidi inherited all these guys, right? Like Longoria, Crawford, Belt, Samardzija, Cueto, and probably some others as well. And they didn't cut any of them. And the philosophy they took was actually to try to improve them, improve what you have. They invested more in like making their own players better versus like getting rid of them, meanwhile paying those salaries already and then trying to find somebody else. And for the most part, that has been a successful strategy. But for someone like Longoria, who notably came up in, was it the first inning on Thursday in that final game of the Braves series, bases loaded, one out against a right-handed pitcher, and just for me, like predictably grounded into a double play. There's too much contact on the ground against right-handed pitching. Anecdotally, I don't actually have that number pulled up, but when I look at the numbers, he ended up having a solid game, and he's got a 107 weighted runs created plus. The expected numbers are even better than that. So I don't think that that's going to happen either right now. But I just believe that if the situation arose where it made sense, that they wouldn't hesitate to make this move. Okay, they might hesitate, but I think that they would do it if it made baseball sense. Like, And here's the thing. I think it could. It has entered my mind, like if Longoria really struggles, you've got Jason Vossler, who did a really good job in the major leagues this year when he was up. And then they sent him down while he was doing well because they didn't have room. You've got David Villar, who's now got 20-plus home runs in AAA. He's got 20 home runs, a 147 weighted runs created plus, albeit with a 29% strikeout rate, which is a little bit concerning. Similar rate as Joey Bart had in AAA, and look at what that translated to in the major leagues. I'm not saying that would be the case necessarily, but it's a little higher than you would like. But between Vossler and Villar, and Vossler's already on the 40-man, could you form a better option at third base than Longoria? And Longoria is in the last year of his contract, and so you kind of have to figure out the future of the third base position a little bit. And he's going to be 37 years old in October, Longoria is. And so I wouldn't put it past them that this is a possibility if he either gets hurt and they just need a 40-man spot, or if the performance suffers. And for McGee, same deal. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but if he just isn't getting it done, and especially if they believe they're not going to pick up that club option for next year, at a certain point, it just makes sense to clear the spot and get somebody else on if you think it's a better option. But I don't think they're there yet with any of these guys. So it's something to look out for sure, though. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please smash that thumbs up button, 5-star button. Whatever you can do, thanks in advance. And thank you so much to everyone who's done so already. Have a great weekend, Giants versus Reds. Hopefully, 2 out of 3 is kind of a baseline expectation for me out of the series. Anything worse than that, and we will be heated on Monday. But hopefully we're rolling with good vibes on Monday. So anyway, thanks again for listening. And as always, stay locked on Giants.